about his word and then worship him once our worship service gets started here. So this week, I figured we would just wrap up our conversation from last week, where we started who is Satan, right? And we went through, and the world thinks that he's this fallen angel, and they're misapplying two different passages that we looked at, one from Isaiah and one from Ezekiel last week, 14 and 28 respectively, of those. So we saw those are talking about human rulers at the time, not Satan. So who is he? And we went through the scriptures to see that he is a dragon. He is the dragon that God made, also called the Leviathan. So we see that's what makes all of those things make sense, that the serpent in the garden is this creature, this actual serpent, which also means dragon. Like we said, that same word means a Hebrew constellation that's a dragon in the night sky. That this dragon was speaking to Eve, and he was made on day 5, the day of flying and swimming creatures. So then, as we saw, when he got punished and he was made to then crawl with his belly in the dust and eat dust all the days of his life, what likely was taken from him was his wings, not his legs. Most people think, oh, that's how we got snakes. They used to have these crazy legs or something. No. That would also make God exceptionally bad at justice. If an angel came down, masqueraded as a snake, and then God punished the race of snakes by taking all of their legs, that would be hilariously poor justice. So that is clearly not what happened. But instead, as we can see in Psalm 74, and I don't think I read all of this last time, and I stopped short. Psalm 74, verse 14, we actually get to see a description here of what happened to God, or what God caused to happen to the Leviathan, the serpent, the dragon. So in Psalm 74, verses 13 and 14, we read this last time. You divided the sea by your strength. You broke the heads of the sea monster in the waters. And most of your Bibles will probably have sea monsters, plural, but that's that same word, tanin. And it is a singular word, but the translators get confused because we're talking about multiple heads. But then the writer says it again here in verse 14, you crushed the heads, plural, of Leviathan, singular, stating the same thing, so that Leviathan and tanin are the same. And here's the verse that I think I stopped short of reading last time. You gave him, or a piece of him, as food for creatures in the wilderness. So this is God chopping off the wings of the dragon and then just giving them to the critters of the wilderness, of the desert, to eat those wings. Satan's never getting those wings back, which is why, as we saw in Job chapter 1 and 2, he is probably very angrily stating to God when he says, where have you been? Oh, roaming about the earth and walking on it, since I can't fly, might be the second half of that. But that's exactly why he's saying he's walking. He's not lying to God if he's actually a snake that slithers on its belly. So we went through all of that last week, and class ran long. I figured it probably would, but it's really good discussion, and I know this is probably brand new to all of you, that this is not what the world thinks Satan is that he is this dragon and not a fallen angel. But that is what the Bible has led us to believe. And that's exactly how he's described in the book of Revelation, that he's this great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns. The crowns, that's probably figurative, talking about his ruling and dominion and the influence that he has over the world. But is he a 7-headed dragon? Probably. I think that part is probably correct, just like Revelation is describing him. And we saw the key verse that's kind of really tying all of those things together in Isaiah chapter 27, the first verse. We see that Leviathan, tanin, which means dragon, and nakash, which means serpent, are all tied together in that one verse, showing that those are all the same word, that we're talking about the same creature for all of those instances of the word. So some of the things that I don't think we covered very well, I mean, we kind of rushed through them at the end, and several of you asked me about this on your way out the door, was why? Why would God make this dragon? You know, we talked about it, and the fact that Greg had brought it up as well, that all of the ancient cultures of the world, they all have a dragon story or something like a dragon, a big flying lizard that can breathe fire, usually is intelligent and usually massive. But then we also noticed that that's kind of interesting because several continents of the world, like South America and Europe, they always tell their dragon stories with dragons that have wings. Whereas the dragon stories from Africa and Asia, those dragons can still fly, but we've all seen the Chinese dragons, they're like big noodles flying through the sky, no wings. Isn't that strange that some of the people of the world, they all agree this thing could fly, but some of them say, no, he had no wings, and some of them say, yes, he had wings. It's almost like some of them from Noah's Ark, Noah's family, maybe had half the story, or remembered, oh yeah, I remember God took his wings. It didn't have wings. And others said, yeah, I remember originally he had wings. So that's how I'm going to tell these stories to all the descendants that then spread out into these areas. So anyway, the question that we were answering, or wanted to get back to answering, taking a little bit more time, was why would God make such a creature as this, right? And the Leviathan was described in detail in Job chapter 41. So go ahead and turn over to Job chapter 41, because this is also where we are going to get a couple of the answers of what we are looking for, as far as why God made the Leviathan, the dragon, the serpent. And at the same time, we also see that this creature is paired with another kind of divine beast, right? A God-created beast called the behemoth from Job chapter 40. And we're going to look at both of those because they fill in a little bit more of the puzzle for us a little bit. So Job chapter 41, the Leviathan is described here, and it's a dragon. That's what's being described here. It's a enormous, scaly creature that breathes fire, as we saw from verses 19 or 18 through 21, that he's actually breathing fire. The commentators that will say, oh, this is a crocodile that just blows mist when it comes out of the water. No, it's saying in verse 21, his breath kindles coals and flame goes out from his mouth. That's not figurative language. That's saying his breath is actually lighting stuff on fire, is actually making coals that are burning on the land. So all of this description, and we really took a look at verses 33 and 34. Nothing on earth is like him, one made without fear. And like we talked about before in Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? Which is the only way that any thinking creature could ever think that they would have a shot against God, is if they don't fear anything. And that's exactly what God, who's the one speaking through this entire chapter, says this dragon is. He's made without fear, which means he would be fearless enough to think that he could take on God, which of course is absurd. He also looks on everything that's high. Verse 34, he is king over all the sons of pride. And we tied that back to 1 Timothy chapter 3, I believe that's verse 7, when we're talking about the qualifications for elders, adding a man to the eldership, that he cannot be a new convert lest he fall to conceit and the condemnation of the devil. So we know this is what condemned the devil, was his own conceit, his own arrogance, his own pride in himself, and thinking that he was better than what he is. So again, all of that, again, is just kind of wrap up of what we talked about last week, but why? Why did God make such a creature that humans couldn't contend against? No weapon that we have is going to pierce his scale. Obviously, we would be nothing in the face of a dragon. And we started to read this last time, but we went over it pretty quickly. So in Job 41, verses 9 through 11, God is talking about this, about the fact that we cannot beat him in a fight. And we should realize some things because of that. If we're staring at this amazing creature, in verse 9, God says, behold, your expectation is false. You will be laid low even at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to arouse him, the Leviathan, this dragon. Who then is he that can stand before me? Who has given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. This is God talking. And he switches context. He's saying, look at this dragon. Realize how pathetic you are in terms of might and strength compared to him. And then you need to realize I made him. So any human that was getting too big for their britches, thinking, I'm a self-made man, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps, I have all these tanks and armies, and I am so great, we don't need God. the point seems to have been that they were to be able to look at this dragon, who was clearly visible. I don't believe that he is now, but he was clearly visible. Clearly, Eve had a conversation with him. And we were supposed to realize, oh, all of the guns and tanks and everything that we have can't beat that. And God made that. So what are we doing thinking that we can beat God? What are we doing thinking that we don't need God? We can't even beat one of his creatures, much less God himself. From these verses, it seems like the primary function of Satan was to be a check and balance to human arrogance, to human conceit. We were supposed to not become so prideful, because we could look at that and realize, oh, that's right, we actually are nothing in the grand scheme of things as far as might and power, and God is even higher than that dragon. So that seems to be one of the primary reasons why Satan was even created, was to be a check and balance to our own arrogance. And obviously what happened? He fell to his own pride, his own conceit, and because of that, human pride and conceit has run rampant, wouldn't we say? As we look around the world and all these people think that they don't need God, or that the universe was just an accident, or all of these things that they want to think about. Boy, it sure would have been helpful if we had some great flying, fire-breathing monster to be like, oh yeah, that's right, life is beyond just what we think it is, the natural order of things. But he fell to his own pride. So now Satan doesn't do the job he was supposed to do, which is keep us in check. Instead, as we looked at last week, he spends all of his time accusing the brethren. He knows that he is destined for the lake of fire one day, and he wants to bring as many Christians as he can with him. Satan doesn't particularly care about the rest of the unsaved world. Why would he? They're already bound for the same place that he is. But he stands, as we read in Revelation last week, day and night accusing our brethren, just like he did Job, accusing them of wrongdoing, just like he was doing for Joshua the high priest when we read that in the book of Zechariah, that he was standing at his right, accusing him before God of all of the things that he did wrong and why God should punish his people, because they weren't good enough, because they were sinful, because of whatever accusations he can lob. That is what Satan spends all of his time doing now. So, Jeremy, go ahead.
So, is he omnipotent?
No, he is not. And we're actually going to be talking more about that, about, is he omniscient? Is he omnipresent? Is he omnipotent? Is he all-powerful, all-knowing, and is he all places at all times? And the answer to all of those is no. And we're going to look at that more specifically, but he's not God. He is just this creature. He's incredibly powerful, but he still can only be in one place at one time. And just like what we saw with Job, he makes assumptions. He doesn't know the future. Only God knows the future. So when he was saying, oh, if you take Job's stuff, he'll curse you to his face. God allowed him to take all of his stuff. Job did not curse him to his face. Oh, well, if you touch his flesh, Job will curse you to his face. God allowed Satan to punish his flesh, and Job did not curse God to his face. So Satan was wrong back to back in those accounts. So we know that he doesn't know everything. Just from that, but we'll get into more of that as we keep going. Great, go ahead.
Dale used to say, if Satan knew that Jesus was going to succeed, he would have never put him on it. He would have never allowed or tried not to allow him to be put on the cross.
Yes.
But,
yeah.
So right there is an indication that Satan didn't know the plan.
Right.
The other thing is, what about Eve? If this thing is so massive and ugly and whatever, and then it talks, and then she's going to talk to it, it's like,
So that's a good question. Let's put ourselves in the mindset of Eve for a second, right? And we've seen, or those of us that maybe have seen horror movies before, one of the tropes, one of the recurring themes that they'll have is that children will engage with some of these terrifying creatures. I think that was in the Shining a little bit. I think that was in the Poltergeist, where it's like the little girl is like talking to the voices coming out of the TV or the house. I don't know, I never saw it, but I understand that much of it, that children are usually willing to engage. And why? Why is that? Because they're innocent, because they don't know better, because they don't even know enough to be scared. And remember, going back into the Garden of Eden, nothing's even eating meat. God is having every creature just eat fruits and vegetables. So there is no pain. Animals aren't even attacking each other. There is no death. There's no blood being shed. There's nothing. Why would Eve be afraid of anything, right? You're just like a child. You're just talking to, oh, you're another thing that talks like me, so I'm just going to talk to you. And when we think about that innocence and the state of the world, then of course it makes sense. Like, why wouldn't I engage in this conversation with this other thing that started speaking to me? I've just got that guy over there, so he can be a distance away. I'll talk to you, and then God is awesome. I'll talk to him when he comes by, but he's not here right now, so I guess I'll talk to you. Harold, go ahead.
Janie's grandma, she was talking to one of her granddaughters or daughter or something. The daughter said, well, Satan doesn't scare me off. He's ugly. And Grandma said, no, honey. She said, Satan is a beautiful man. He'll attract you. But
yes,
what she was just saying, he's not going to make it ugly. You're going to think it's okay.
Right, and that was what we had looked at when we were first talking about the interaction that Satan had with Eve when we were still just going through Genesis. Was Satan, or not even just Satan, evil does not make its intentions known up front, right? When Satan first asked Eve a question, the question was innocent and kind of a stupid question, right? Did God really say you can't eat from any tree of the whole garden? If that was true, she would have starved to death, because that's all humans could eat. So he already knew that answer, but just innocently, oh, can you really not eat from any tree or bush in the garden? That's crazy. Just to get her talking. And then once the conversation kept going, then we go from innocent question to get some engagement to then full-blown rebellion. Is you shouldn't listen to God, you should do the exact opposite of what God said and do what I said. Even though I haven't done anything for you yet, you should believe me instead of God who's done everything for you, right? So you're right, evil doesn't make its intentions known up front, and the Bible even says that Satan masquerades as an angel of light. Makes you kind of wonder what maybe Joseph Smith or other people who thought they were dealing with an angel, maybe they actually did see something. Who knows what that could have been? Greg, go ahead.
The other thing is, we don't know the time frame of how long Adam and Eve was in the garden before Satan approached Eve.
Right.
So, that might have been part of the thing. Oh, I'm relaxed. I'm used to the surroundings. I'm a new creature myself. Eve.
Mm-hmm.
So, hey, I'm not expecting something.
Right, and all of that just goes, because what Greg was saying is we don't know how much time passed, or maybe we just have other conversations between them that maybe weren't recorded or something. All of this goes to just, was it extremely plausible that it happened exactly like the Bible said it happened? Yes. It's very easy to believe when we think we don't know how long they were there, childlike innocence, nothing was dying or suffering or painful or anything. So of course, it's extremely plausible that it happens exactly like the Bible said that it happens. And that's our faith of believing the things that we can't see, right? That's Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, is our assurance of things unseen, and hope of what has been promised to us. Tim, go ahead.
I guess I got 3 questions.
Okay.
He says we're to have dominion over all things.
Mm-hmm.
2, he is eternal. Satan would be.
Why would he be? Why would he have no
Well,
beginning? We read when he was
Well, we had the
created.
beginning, but he has no end.
Right.
As far as we know. So he's eternal like we are.
Well,
I
yeah,
guess
so
you
his spirit would be immortal, just like our
Yes.
spirits are immortal, right?
Yeah.
Never ending, correct.
So how do you reconcile that with the other creatures? And if he sinned, the price of sin is death. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So Tim's asking a couple questions here, that The second one was, so is he unending, right? And whether his physical body was going to be unending, maybe God can do whatever he wants as far as the body that he gave this creature. If he would have continued to do his job, my guess is he probably would have continued on in that same physical form because it was effective. But because he has not done his job, because he's forsaken that, is it possible that God killed him on the spot? Is it possible that we should read this as literal when we see in Psalms and in other places, in Isaiah, when it says, you have crushed the head of Leviathan? Did God actually kill the creature himself? And it's just his spirit now that is wandering the earth, and maybe that's why we can't see him or touch him or interact with him? I think that that's very plausible as well, because that would be the instant death, but he also has long-term death coming, right?
Yeah.
Which is the same for us, right? When we sin, if I steal something, I don't just drop over dead, but my soul is now bound for spiritual death. And that's the same with Satan also, is that his soul is bound for spiritual death. And we actually see that, a hint of that, in Genesis chapter 3, when God is first giving the punishments to everybody. And I'll just read this. You guys don't have to flip over there. But what God said was, because you have done this, cursed are you more than all of the other cattle and more than every beast of the field. Right? And as we just consider that, how could the Leviathan be more cursed than any other creature? Because he has a spirit, right? And he has an eternal punishment now. Every other creature, when we kill it, it's just dead, just lights out, right? So that's how we can see that him as a creature will be more cursed than any other creature.
Yep.
And I can't remember, did you have a third one that I didn't touch on?
Dominion. Well, the first was dominion, have dominion.
Oh, dominion. So, okay, that one I'll put on the back burner because that's what we're going to be getting to, is like, how powerful is he? What kind of influence does he have right now? So
But he does call it, but he says we have dominion over all his
Oh,
creation.
yes, that's right. So you were talking about, so Tim's third question was, why then did humans get dominion over all creation when there's this omega beast, right, that we would have no chance against? Because that's what God decided. He made us in his image. And do we think that that might have been part of why Satan was so mad and so prideful? He's this dragon, this untouchable creation, but dominion over this whole creation was given to these two little meat sacks that God made. That he's like, oh, I could squish them with one claw. But they're the ones in charge because we were made in the image of God. Do we think that that probably made him mad, probably made him conceited of, well, I'm way better than them, I should be in charge, right? All of this coming down to, just like the Bible says in 1 Timothy, him falling to his own conceit. It actually makes a lot of sense as to, well, yeah, I'm way better than them, I should be in charge, me, Leviathan.
Yeah. And actually, we do have dominion in that we have free will, and he cannot choose for us.
That's true, yes.
So we can choose our own destiny.
Right.
We can't choose it for us.
Yes, he can tempt us, but at the end of the day, all he's doing is like he did with Eve, putting something in front of us, trying to put our attention on it, but
Yes.
we still have to make the choice. He can't force us to do anything, and that's probably very frustrating as well.
Yeah.
Because he knows he can just physically pick us up and do stuff, but God won't let him, right? So yes, good questions. Now, last week, one of the other things that we talked about was the fact that the Septuagint version of the Bible, the Greek Old Testament, sometimes contains details that the current Old Testament that we have, which is based off the Hebrew text or the Masoretic text, omits or has changed over time. One of those actually lends us to maybe understanding a little bit more about these two omega beasts that God made, the behemoth on the land and the Leviathan in the sea and air. So let's look at Job chapter 40, and we're going to look at behemoth in verse 15, and so I'm going to read it from my Old Testament first, from the NASB, so this should be very similar to what everybody else is reading. Behold now, behemoth, this is Job chapter 40, verse 15. Behold now, behemoth, which I made as well as you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold now, his strength is in his loins, and his power is in the muscles of his belly. He bends his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. Verse 19, he is the first of the ways of God. Let his maker bring near his sword. kind of a strange jump, right? That God is talking about the might and majesty of this creature that he created, and then suddenly, oh, God should bring his sword and kill this thing. Why? Where did that come from? Possibly this may be a mistranslation from what was originally written in there. Now, like we said, the Septuagint, the Greek version, is actually a far older version of the Old Testament than the oldest Masoretic text that we have, which only goes back to somewhere between 900 and 1100 AD. The Septuagint goes back to 300 to 200 BC when it was made, when it was first translated. Let's read in the Septuagint that same verse. So verse 19. Okay. This is the chief of the creation of the Lord. Okay, well, that's pretty similar to the start of our verse 19. This is the chief of the creation of the Lord, made to be played with by his angels. Well, that's completely different, isn't it? It's almost like God made this thing to be played with, sported with, roughhousing with the angels. Do angels get bored? Can they have fun? Do they want to wrestle? Everything? All of these questions that could spawn, but wow, what a difference this passage may have originally said. And the reason that I believe that is actually the correct translation is because let's go back to chapter 41 of Job. And this is a verse that we had read earlier. This is verse 33 of chapter 41. Nothing on earth is like him, one made without fear. He looks on everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. And those seem correct based on what else we know about Satan. But as we go to the Septuagint's verse 33 and 34, let's read this, because they could possibly both be correct as well. That maybe something has now been omitted from one version or the other, which was captured by both. Listen to this rendering of verse 33. There is nothing on the earth like to him. So again, very similar. There is nothing on the earth like him, formed to be sported with by my angels. This is both of these omega beasts that God has made. He describes them both the same. These were things that were made to play with, sport with the angels, to roughhouse with angels. As mighty as angels are, one angel killed 185,000 Assyrian troops in a single night. And these creatures could roughhouse with them, could play with them. That's how powerful Behemoth and Leviathan are. And I think this is part of what their original intention was too. That the rest of the creation is for us and is kind of more our speed, although we really can't do much with an elephant, unless we've got a really big gun or something. But did God make some part of the creation, maybe two creatures at least, for his angels? Possibly. And this is a possibility that we need to consider, is that maybe these weren't made for us. Yes, Leviathan seems to also have a job for us to keep our pride in check, but maybe these weren't made for us. They were made for things not our speed, made for angels. So as far as why was Satan created, I think that we can glean a couple of good answers from the Bible here to keep our pride in check, and as playing comrades for the angels, for the other spiritual beings. So I'll pause there and open it back up for questions, comments, thoughts on any of that. Greg, go ahead.
A lot of people like to use the verses where it describes, it must be a dinosaur. Because his legs are like bronze and all that stuff. So a lot of people try to fit that into, that's why there was dinosaurs.
Yeah. That and God describes a singular behemoth. He describes a singular Leviathan, and if they're like, it's that big, crazy long-necked dinosaur, that's probably what's being described here. No, there were tons of those. If those ever roamed the earth like scientists, archaeologists think they did, well, there were tons of them. It's not just the one. This is something different. And again, the idea of even Behemoth being a creature made without fear, like Leviathan, is there. If we're looking at this closely, in the end of chapter 40, when he says the lotus plants cover him with shade, the willows of the brook surround him. If a river rages, he is not alarmed. He is confident though the very Jordan rushes to his mouth. What is this saying? That even if water is coming up so high that it's at his mouth level, like he's in danger of drowning, he is still confident. He's not even alarmed. He doesn't possibly even fear drowning. Maybe these things can't physically die, although there's a good chance that God actually physically killed Leviathan as well. But this seems to be another creature without fear. He doesn't fear drowning even when the water is getting up to his mouth and eyes level. So again, maybe both of these creatures were made without fear, and that would make a lot of sense if they were to play with the angels. Yeah, you gotta not be able to fear an angel if you're going to roughhouse with it, if you're going to challenge it to wrestling or something. All right, so other questions, thoughts, and comments on all of this?
What is that, the name of the third beast? We have the Leviathan, the Behemoth. I couldn't hear the spelling.
Oh, so Behemoth is this kind of omega beast of the land. Leviathan was made to swim in the seas and to fly, apparently. But Leviathan has 3 descriptors in the Bible. So Leviathan is one. Tanin is usually translated sea monster or sea dragon. And Nakash, which is the term that's usually translated serpent, but it also means dragon. So in the garden, when it says that Eve talked to the serpent, the word in Hebrew there is Nakash. And in Genesis chapter 1, on day 5, it says that when God was filling up the oceans with the things that were going to live in them, on that day he also made the great sea monster. And the Bible, our Bible, will have that as plural, the great sea monsters or great sea dragons. It's just one. It's just on that day God made the Tanin. That's talking about Satan. And we see all 3 of those in Isaiah chapter 27, verse 1. That's where all 3 of these terms are tied together. So we can flip over there really quick and I'll read that. Isaiah 27, verse 1. In that day, this is the end of all time. In that day, the Lord will punish Leviathan, the fleeing Nakash. The fleeing, it's translated serpent, but what is actually written here in Hebrew, I'm going to use the Hebrew words here, will punish Leviathan, the fleeing Nakash, with his fierce and great and mighty sword, even Leviathan, the twisted Nakash, and he will kill the Tanin who lives in the sea. So we see in that one verse, the Bible ties all 3 of those terms together as meaning the same thing. So, did that answer the question, or did I misunderstand it? Oh. Any other questions, thoughts, comments? If not, then we'll get into more of what is Satan's power, how strong is he, all of that. All right. Then we will continue on, and we're going to now look at his influence. And this is going to be started in Luke chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. And Luke chapter 4, some of you may already realize, oh, well, this is that section of the temptations of Christ. And you're right. This is Satan speaking to Jesus, tempting him directly. And we're going to pick up on a specific thing that Satan says as we look at the rest of the dominion that Satan's been given. He even explains it that same way. So we are going to Luke chapter 4, and I'm going to start here in verse 5. And he, Satan, led him, Jesus, up and showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment of time. So shows him a vision of all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, I will give you all this domain and its glory, for it has been handed over to me, and I give it to whomever I wish. Therefore, if you worship me, it shall all be yours. The first thing we need to realize is that Satan is in control of most of the world. Not in that he physically can control it, or that he physically ripped it away from God's control, but because God is allowing him to influence the vast majority of the world. And obviously that's true. We look around and we see all of the decisions that are clearly influenced by Satan doing the exact opposite of what God wants us to do. The whole world is being held under his sway. But Satan did not ever steal it. He did not ever outmuscle God for it. God's allowing him to have all of this influence over the world. In fact, it's so much influence that in John chapter 12, verse 31, and in John 14, verse 30, he's referred to as the ruler of this world. And he's referred to in that way by Jesus. So I'll just flip over to one of those. We'll just look at John chapter 14, verse 30. But again, similar thing is said here in chapter 12, verse 31. Oops, went one page too far. 14, verse 30. This is Jesus speaking, might be the red letter text in your Bible. I will not speak much more with you, for the ruler of this world is coming, and he has nothing in me. That is talking about Satan and the approach of Satan's plans finally culminating together. And Greg brought up a good point. If Satan had known what was going on, he would have protected Jesus at all costs, right? He wouldn't have wanted him to die for the sins of the world. And the Bible actually infers that. In Romans, I believe it is, Paul is talking about the fact that if the rulers of this world had known, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. But God hid all of these plans from the evil one and from all of the rulers that are under his sway, that he is so easily able to influence. God could stop him from influencing anytime he wanted. But God has allowed us to have free will, which means we have to be able to choose things that are bad for us, that are bad for others, otherwise it's not free will. Right? We kind of gave a silly example for that, but it's not free will if God puts us in a round room and says, you can sit anywhere you want, just don't sit in any of the corners. Like, well, I can't. So, I mean, I guess I have free will, but if there was a corner here, I'd love to think about sitting in it, but I can't even do that. God has to give us the options for doing evil, even if it brings punishment on ourselves, or we don't have true free will. So, here we have Satan saying all of this dominion has been given to him. God's allowing him to have all of this influence. Jesus even refers to him as the ruler of this world. If we go to 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, we will see Paul talking about him as well. 2 Corinthians 4:4. There it is. And listen to Paul describing Satan, or the title that he gives him. In whose case the God, little g, little God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving so that they may not see the light of the gospel and the glory of Christ, who is in the image of God. So here we also have another apostle saying the God of this world. That's the influence that Satan has. And now we can turn finally to 1 John chapter 5, towards the end. 1 John chapter 5, verse 19, almost to the very end of that letter as well. And here we have another apostle, John the Apostle, describing how much influence Satan has here. 1 John chapter 5, verse 19, we know that we are of God. That's us Christians. We know we are of God, and that the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. So again, how much influence does Satan have? A ton. Let's not sugarcoat that. He has, this whole world is completely diluted by his influence, as we can obviously see with all of the horrific things that happen and the sinfulness and the temptation and all of the evil that happens. Satan does an extremely good job tempting humans to sin and fall away from the glory of God. Great, go
I
ahead.
don't want to get you off track, but the Romans 8:28, which we not always use,
Mhm.
is the idea that God works all things together for good for his purpose. And
For who?
God's purpose.
Well, right, but he works all things together for good for
Those
those
who
that
love
love him. Right.
Right.
So if
So-
we're talking about a couple of people that both equally don't know God, and one of them stabs the other one and robs him and takes his wallet and stuff, is God working all that together for good? No, that might just be an abject evil thing that happened because neither of them love God or are called according to his purpose. Now, could God use sinful situations, and does he throughout the Bible constantly, to put his people in the right place to succeed? Like, we can even just use the quick example of Joseph. He goes to Egypt, right? His brothers throw him down an empty well and then sell him to slave traders. Then he gets sold to Potiphar, and Potiphar's wife keeps trying to have him sleep with her, and then when he doesn't, she gets mad and accuses him of trying to rape her, so then he gets thrown in prison. And all of that, God used all of these sinful decisions that all of these people were making to put Joseph there where the chief cupbearer and the chief baker were, so that they could have dreams and he could interpret them. The cupbearer gets restored to Pharaoh, and 2 years later tells him about this guy Joseph who could interpret a dream. And all of that was to bring Joseph right to the right hand of Pharaoh, give him all this power. And Joseph even says in Genesis to his brothers, you meant these things for good, but God meant them for evil, to bring many people alive. Right? So God can use and does use all things. So even the good, the bad, the ugly, not that movie, but he uses all things together for good for those that love him and are called according to his purpose.
It is the conditional thing, but for us as Christians, it also shows that we have to have the faith
Right.
that God is he's still in ultimate control.
And
But
that's
it's just like in Job, you know, where he allowed Satan to do certain things. But God was able to bless Job even more.
right.
And that's the thing for us, for our faith, to say, no matter what, I don't understand it, but somehow He's gonna work it out.
Well, and we know that God will cause all these things to work out, because now we can look at some of the verses of the power of Satan and the limitations that are on him. So if we're still there in 1 John, let's turn back one chapter, and we're going to go to 1 John chapter 4. And we are going to look at verse 4. In 1 John chapter 4, this is one of those things, as Greg was saying, that should give us faith that God is going to win in the end. 1 John 4:4, you are from God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is he who is in you than he who is in the world. God wins. God is the ultimate. As scared as we should have been of Satan, Satan should have been infinitely more scared of God, although he was made without fear. But the other angels that followed him in rebellion should have also felt that fear of going up against the God of all things, but they didn't. And if every created thing took a stand against God, and it was God versus everything, that's still not a fair fight. God could just blow it all away. It's nothing. You're all gone. God wins, and if we are with God, then nothing can stand against us. And that's Romans chapter 8, verse 31, that if God is with us, who then is against us? And we can even rephrase that to, who can be against us? And of course, that answer is nothing. And as we're talking about the limitations, because greater is the one who is with us, Christians, than the one who is with the world, Satan, we know that we will never be tempted beyond what we can bear. That's in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 13, that you will never be tempted beyond what you can bear. Actually, let me just read it. I'm just turning over here right now. Anyway, no temptation has overtaken you, but such is common to man, and God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with every temptation will provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. And the entire book of Job is a demonstration of this from the very beginning. If we go to Job chapters 1 and 2, we'll just summarize here, but again, as Satan is coming up and accusing, oh, Job only loves you because you've given him all this stuff. Take away the stuff and he'll hate you. Job only loves you because you've protected his physical life and his body. Take away that stuff and he'll hate you. And God, every time, when Satan puts forth one of these accusations, in verse 12 of Job chapter 1, he says, behold, all that he has is in your power, only, here's the line, only do not put forth your hand on him. God is still putting restrictions on Satan. And then again in chapter 2, when he says, touch his flesh and he will curse you face to face. Verse 6, so the Lord said to Satan, behold, he is in your power, only spare his life. Here's the line again, and you cannot cross it, because God will not allow us to be tempted beyond what we are able to bear. So whenever Satan wants to tempt us with anything, God will always set the line. And Satan must obey, because greater is he who is with us than he who is in the world. that is what we need to always remember is, yes, he's incredibly powerful, incredibly devious, very intelligent, but he is still a created being. He doesn't know everything, like we see here with Job. He was wrong back-to-back times. Oh, take his stuff and he'll curse you. Okay, we took his stuff, he didn't say anything. Take his flesh and he'll curse you. Okay, you afflicted him as best as you wanted to, and he did not curse me. Satan was wrong back-to-back times, but it's not ever going to stop him from launching accusations at God's followers because he knows his time is short. And he doesn't want to be the only one burning in hell for all eternity. He wants to bring as many of us with him as he can because he wants to make God as sad as possible. He wants to hurt God, that God's children who accepted salvation maybe got ripped away from that, got ripped back into the world. That's what Satan wants to do. That's the only revenge he can get because he can't physically touch God or contend with him. He knows that now. So all he can try and do is just harm God emotionally as much as he can by taking as many of us and the entire world with him into this lake of fire. Because that is Satan's end. And that is really where I want to, as we're putting a bow on this, Matthew chapter 25. You can go ahead and all flip over there because this one is fairly important for a couple reasons. This is again Jesus speaking. Matthew 25, verse 41. So in this whole section as we're turning over there, this is when Jesus is talking about the final judgment. And actually I'll read verses 31 through 33 first so we have context. But when the Son of Man comes in his glory, so when Jesus comes back and all of his angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. All of the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate them one from the other, as the shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he will put his sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left. And the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." And now let's drop down to verse 41. Then he will say to those on his left, the goats, "Depart from me, accursed ones, into the eternal fire which has been prepared for the devil and his angels." We've talked before, maybe in passing I've said this, but when people ask, how bad is hell going to be? Do you think we'll ever get used to it? You know, if somebody gets sent to hell, any amount of horrific thing that you think hell can have, it will be worse. And it actually makes a lot of sense why hell is even designed the way it is. Leviathan, this creature of the sea and the air, now only the sea because God took his wings, if not his whole physical life. He lives in the water, right? He swims in lakes, in oceans, in these bodies of water. What could be a worse punishment for such a creature than to be in a lake made of fire and not water for all eternity? Have you ever wondered why it's the lake of fire? Maybe it's to punish an aquatic creature by putting it in the exact opposite of what it should be in, a lake of fire instead of water. And by the way, all of the angels that followed you, they're going to go there. And by the way, this punishment that was designed for the most evil creature ever in all history, that's where all of the humans who don't accept the salvation that Jesus Christ offers us, they're going to go there as well. Because there is going to be no third option. There is heaven, there's earth, there's hell. When Jesus comes back, everyone is going to ascend to be judged. And then he's going to burn up all of the creation. Earth, the universe, all created material things, gone forever. There will only be heaven and there will only be hell. And anything that is sinful, has sins still on it, every soul cannot go into heaven. Therefore, there is only one place for them to go. Into the lake of fire, which was made for the devil and his angels. It wasn't even made for humans. But we will go there if we haven't allowed God to save us by obeying his commands to be saved. So any other questions as we're wrapping up this class? Tim, go ahead.
I just had one comment here in Jude 9. It just reinforces the Septuagint. In what you talk about in Job, it says, "Yet Michael, the archangel, contending with the devil, as he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not to bring against him the reviling accusations, and said, the Lord rebuke you." Mm-hmm. That they contended, that they were wrestling, I guess.
Yeah, so in that case, it seems like they're arguing, but even that, so I'm glad that you brought that up because it was something that I hadn't really thought about, but you know, how much respect should we have for Satan? How should we talk about him? Is it okay for us to say, oh, well, Satan, that's so-and-so and that piece of whatever? No, because as Tim just brought up, in the book of Jude, Michael the archangel, so the chief angel, is arguing with the devil about the body of Moses, because that would obviously be extremely important to the Jews. And Michael the archangel is staring in the face of the most evil being ever, the one that caused sin to enter the world through Adam and Eve, and he would not even insult Satan. He said, "The Lord rebuke you. I'm not even going to say anything to you." Why? Because God made Satan directly. In the beginning of Job, it says, there came a day when the sons of God assembled themselves before the Lord, and Satan also was there. Satan is a son of God, one of the many sons of God, because he's a direct creation of God. Just like Behemoth was, just like all of the angels are, and just like Adam was, although Adam obviously wasn't there. But in Luke, as we go through the genealogy, we will see that was the son of so-and-so, was the son of so-and-so, was the son of Seth, the son of Adam, and Luke says Adam was the son of God, because he was directly created by God. And Michael, an archangel, will not even say anything negative to Satan because he respects the God who made him. Not the creature himself, but Michael would say, I respect the God who made you, so I'm not even going to say anything against you. If God wants to rebuke you, he can, because he's God.
Amen.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We ran long again, but this is a really interesting topic, so I'm glad that we got to go through this. And we will go ahead and break for worship.